And welcome back to another edition of the On the Board Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Thomas, aka Shawnee on the mic. Happy Wednesday to everybody out there. Sun is shining. I'm quarantined here in Queens, New York, joined by my main man, the best co-host in the business, William Chirucci, aka Will C. Will, how you doing, man?
Hanging in. We got the Jordan stuff in the background. Obviously, you see the gym stuff. And it's episode 201 of the On the Board Sports Podcast. So, yes, it's truly awesome with the capital A, and we're loving it right now. But, Sean.
Yes, sir.
We have a very special guest with us. Joining us. Go ahead, Sean. I'll let you introduce.
Very, very special guest. Friend of the show, veteran of the show, a great friend of me and Will. And me and Will, we respect this guy so much. The one and only Brandon Robinson, a.k.a. Scoop B. Scoop, welcome back, man. How are you doing, man?
Gentlemen, what's going on? I'm good. Thanks. I feel like I am a guest in residence on your show. It's the first time we've done video, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
I mean, we do video in the studio, but it's different. You know, we board in the house and then the house board. So, it's cool to join you guys. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Thank you for coming on, and we really appreciate you sacrificing some time. I know you're a busy guy. You're trying to keep up with all the NBA news right now that's going about, but really what's going on is in the back, and the man, the myth, the legend known as Michael Jordan, and The Last Dance that came out, parts 9 and 10 came out on Sunday, and it's been absolutely unbelievable to not only re-witness this history again and to re-feel it, but to hear it from the mouth of MJ and his teammates and his coaches and such, and even the owner of the Chicago Bulls at that point in time, including his adversaries. Brandon, what has been your take on this whole documentary, and what overall do you take away from it?
It was enjoyable. I think, for 5 weeks to sit and watch something that I lived, both as a fan, but also as a member of the media. It was pretty cool. And it's interesting because, it's a conversation that, current players are having, legends and more. Like, there are guys that are in front offices that I've had conversations with just from opposing teams that played against Michael that are just like, man, like it really feels like we're reliving the 90s all over again. I just spoke with Kobe White and Ryan Arcidiacono of the Chicago Bulls on this past Sunday during a chat. Obviously, Zenni Optical Glasses, the official sponsor of the Bulls. And, I was telling the guys how I feel like just basketball in this documentary is like soap operas for men. And Kobe White said how like he would really have like a set schedule, like on Sunday, how he would make sure he took a shower, make sure he had dinner, and while he was just sitting and enjoying the documentary, it was a big deal. And what's interesting is, Kobe was born in 2000, so his recollection of Michael was like minimal. I mean, unless he remembers watching Michael in 2001 when he was 1 year old as a member of the Washington Wizards, there's no recollection of it. And him coming from the North Carolina Tar Heels and being a first-round pick of the Bulls, and first-round pick by the Bulls since Michael Jordan from North Carolina, he said he's learned a lot. And for me personally, I was around that Bulls team during the 97-98 season. And, it was around Michael, Dennis, and Scotty, and Phil Jackson, and, other members of that team, Luke Longley and Ron Harper and more. So I have really enjoyed it because it took me back to my foundation in journalism, being in an NBA locker room. And it's been enjoyable. I've enjoyed it. And I never really stopped working. Nick Anderson was on the podcast which dropped this week, and he relived that whole 45 isn't 23, and we talked about that on the Scoopy Radio podcast. So it's been enjoyable. It's been a lifestyle, and it's not back to work because I never stopped working, but it's pretty cool to kind of relive this on documentary.
Absolutely. And Scoop, you talked about it just now. As a kid, you were part of that Nets season as well during the 97-98 season. What was that like for you, just taking away some of this stuff that really went down?
Well, I vividly remember being in the locker room with the Bulls.
Right.
I can tell you that I remember I've shared this story in the numerous press runs that I've done over the last 5 weeks where I talked about Dennis Rodman being in the visitors' locker room. If you go to look at the old Meadowlands Stadium, the visitors' locker room is like it's a hockey locker room, and you walk in and you open the door and the door it needed WD-40 because it was just so squeaky. And when I walked into the locker room, you had one room where it was like an open space. You had the benches, and then you had the hooks on the wall, and then there was another room that was like the closed off private room where like you had Michael was in there with Tex Winter, Phil Jackson, Frank Hamlin, Jim Clemens, the whole Bull staff. But when you walked in, Dennis was in the room, and you know how like when you were in school, you had like if it was if you had recess or you couldn't go outside, it was rainy. The teacher would wheel in that TV. So like Dennis was watching he was watching footage or a game tape of the previous game that Jason Williams, then Annette was playing. I don't remember who they were playing the night before, a couple of days ago, but he was studying tape. He had headphones on, and he had a T-shirt and pajama pants on, and then he had like these ankle socks with like colorful frilly balls on them. And so he was sitting in the folding chair, Indian style, and he was just studying tape. Like that's the one thing that I think, as much as people look at the dyed hair and maybe trips to Vegas and more, the thing about Dennis that stands out to me, incessantly is his level of commitment to getting better, to staying consistent, and just being that guy. And so when I tapped him on the shoulder, yo, you got a few minutes? Nah, I'm watching tape right now. Get lost, kid. He didn't say get lost, kid, but that basically I'm busy. And I just watched him watching tape in the locker room, and it was pretty cool. So then, throughout the course of that night, like I remember going into because I was a cute kid, I could get away with certain stuff. Like I walked into I'm still cute, but you walk into the room, you open the door, and then it's Michael Jordan. Like he's putting on like his jersey, his shirt, and he looked at me and I looked at him and I smiled and he smiled and I'm like, oh, like it was. Michael was somebody that I grew up, liking. He's the reason why I fell in love with the game of basketball. So like that was there. Then like I remember the actual game. Like I remember it was a few times around the Bulls, but the first time I was around them, like I remember it was a noon game, and I actually had to do a live show. My show was a morning show that came on the radio, and that day, because it was a noon game, we did the show from the arena. And I remember that day being significant because the day that I did the show, I was talking about NBA moves that had happened like that day. And like I remember Theo Ratliff had got traded to either the Pistons or the Sixers. Aaron McKee had gotten traded that week. And then I remember talking about that stuff. And then I remember being on the Nets court playing basketball before the game. Like I remember that just was a thing. Like you were cool if you could play basketball on the court, like an NBA court. And then I went I went and changed my clothes, put on a suit, and I just remember like Luke Longley giving me his sneakers after the game. I remember after the game, like there was a line of reporters standing in front of the visitors' locker room, and like we were like slacking off. And I remember I was right in front, and I remember Phil Jackson came out and he goes, "So you guys just gonna shut up, or you gonna let me talk?" And I just remember little things like that, like. That now I can kind of put together as an adult, But yeah, it was a pretty cool experience. I remember interviewing Ron Harper, and it being difficult at times to talk to, like, because he stuttered. So like I'm looking at him like I'm trying to, like my eyes were trying to help him talk, and I'm not playing him, but I didn't know Ron Harper stuttered until I interviewed him. So it was just little things like that just stood out to me.
Mm.
And also, last thing, I promise I won't ramble anymore.
Oh, go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
Go ahead. We don't mind it.
When I remember, because this was the 97-98 season, of course, I remember Scottie being out, but not knowing why. Scottie didn't make the trip to that. And then so when I looked at the first couple episodes of The Last Dance, I was like, oh shit, that's why he wasn't there. Because of his injury, because he wasn't fucking with Jerry Krause like that. So it all, like, certain things that I knew, it now made sense. I don't think I've ever been this candid about it, but yeah, y'all cool. So nah, man, like, literally, like, I learned a lot from, like, I don't know everything, I don't claim to know everything, but those little facts I didn't know that I learned.
Scoop, man, and me and you thought the same thing. As we know, Scotty is one of the greatest players to ever play the game. So I was looking forward to seeing how great he was being number two. But I felt like during the course of the show, we saw mostly the bad things about him, from him not want to come into the game and the contracts, so on and so forth. So a lot of people are trying to say, as great as the piece made Eichel look, it made Scotty look kind of bad. What's your take on how that piece made Scotty look?
Yeah, I've definitely seen over the last couple of days. Like I know Horace Grant has gone on record talking about how he felt 90% of that documentary was fictitious. I've had I've had Horace Grant on the Scoopy Radio podcast, and him talking about Michael the way he did surprises some people. Horace told me that Michael was the devil, literally called him the devil in practice. He said, when we played in practice, we thought we were the New York Knicks or the Detroit Pistons or the Cleveland Cavaliers, the way Michael was, just how he was on the court and at that practice center. But to directly answer your question, I don't know. I think it's easy to have a reaction right away, right when it's done. I think I'm still very much digesting it. But I think there are some other things that I look at, like I'm curious to know why Carmen Electra was in the documentary, but not Michael's ex-wife or current wife. Why Michael's kids were at the end. I'm curious to know little things like I'm cool with Jason Caffey, who played on the Bulls team, and throughout the whole 5 weeks, he and I've been texting back and forth just various things that are going on. He told me in a text message, I'll find it, but there's some things that he said to me that make sense. As I'm talking to you, I'm scrolling, I'm stalling a little bit. We're on camera, so
all good.
But like he said to me, like he said to me a couple of weeks ago, he was like, I really didn't get into this past Sunday. This was on the first. He texted me Wednesday, March 6th. So whenever that was, that previous Sunday, he goes, I really didn't get into it this past Sunday. I felt like they could have done a better job. The Craig Hodges story or something else controversial. I may watch it again. As of now, I have nothing on it. And so throughout the course of just, the whole process, we've just been comparing notes about different things. He was on that team. I would have liked to have seen I'm glad they showed Bill Cartwright. Because I think that, when you look back at time, they traded Oakley for Bill Cartwright, and Bill Cartwright was that piece that they needed. I remember for years, because he went to San Francisco, people were trying to make Bill Cartwright the next Bill Russell. I'm glad that he found his role with that team. I agree with Jason Caffey with the whole Craig Hodges thing. They didn't touch on it. So for those who are paying attention that aren't familiar with Craig Hodges was Colin Kaepernick before Colin Kaepernick. When the Bulls won their first championship, Craig Hodges was on that team, and the Bulls visited the White House in '91, and Craig Hodges gave a letter to then President George Herbert Walker Bush, letting him know the mistreatment that African Americans were dealing with in the United States at that time. And the rule is, when you go to the White House, you don't hand off things like that, but you hand it off to their point person. So it's believed that President Bush read the letter, but what ended up happening was, shortly thereafter, Hodges was basically blackballed for that spectacle. Like, he wasn't able to join the team, and to this day he's very active in Chicago as an activist. I would have liked to have seen them to delve in more into that. I've had Craig Hodges on the Scoopy Radio podcast, and we talked about Jordan's relationship with politics and not really getting too controversial. And I think that when you look at the Michael Jordan and LeBron James comparisons that people are always making, I don't think there's a comparison. But the one thing I think that LeBron does have a leg up on, for the exception of his not being as outspoken about Darfur back in the day, I think LeBron has been pretty outspoken about a lot of political things in a way that Ali was, and many other people were different eras. Michael it wasn't always so vocal and made statements about Republicans wear sneakers too. That would have been the perfect segue to kind of bring Craig Hodges to the forefront. But I guess because of the relationship he's had with the NBA over the years, it just wasn't feasible. And I think I answered your question and expanded a little more.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, those are some of the things that I wish I would have seen.
Well,
absolutely. And, Scoop, you talk about what had happened throughout not only just building a team in general is just absolutely crazy, but to go from, you had a couple of ex-players on your podcast, guys like Nick Anderson going on there and saying 45 isn't 23, everything like that. What was it like seeing, that Eastern Conference final in 98, going 7 games and having to relive that again, having to deal with those Pacers teams? And number two, since we're all from New York, and to hear Jordan say that the Knicks weren't a part of that, that even though he did say it with the 93 team, the 94 team that went out there and beat them, what was your take on that?
So first of all, the 98 season, the Hornets, and seeing B.J. Armstrong go against his former team, I thought was another enjoyable part. Shameless plug, when I started Scoop B Radio, it actually was started because growing up, I would tell people, I had a radio show with the Nets, and I did this, that, and the third, How do you find it? And people are like, how do you find it? And it's like, well, it's not on a podcast. So what happened was, this is New York as it sounds. I had a ton of audio tapes in a Timberland box that was just collecting dust in my parents' home. And so basically I digitized those tapes. So I remember being in a locker room, the Hornets locker room as a kid, the squeaky door. And it would be B.J. Armstrong was a Hornet at that time. Anthony Mason was on that team, Matt Geiger, Glenn Rice. So I had tapes with interviews with B.J. Armstrong, Matt Geiger, J.R. Reed, who was on that team as well. And the first episode of Scoop B Radio was actually with J.R. Reed. We ended up, putting in Matt Geiger and what have you. But, as I'm going back and I'm looking at The Last Dance and I'm seeing all this Hornet stuff, I'm like, whoa. We started Scoop B Radio in 2016 and we were just digitizing old stuff. I even had an interview as a child with Scott Burrell when he became a Net. And so we're talking about and we stayed in touch. We're talking about what was it like playing for the Bulls? And he spoke reverently about Michael Jordan then. So, for me, this is nostalgic. And then to sit and watch the series against the Pacers. I mean, going back and watching the series against the Nets, I was around that team during that point. And my stepdad is actually from the west side of Chicago. He grew up down the street from the old Chicago Stadium. So, for me, it's a full circle moment then. It's a full circle moment now. And when I watched just the way that Reggie and Michael were jawing at each other, to me, I just realized then, I know now, those were two of the best two guards that were in the NBA. And then when you sit and you really look at just the dichotomy of how rich the NBA was at that point, I think we were spoiled with the amount of talent that we saw, so much so that we still have leftovers to today that we kept in the freezer all this time. And we're now taking a didactic look and surveying just how good we had it. I mean, even people clowning Gary Payton about, and the way he said he was, going at Michael, those are legitimate conversations. And it kind of takes me back to, I had Shaq on the Scoop B Radio podcast a couple months ago, and he talked about, I said to him, yo, do you ever feel like Reggie Miller and Hakeem Olajuwon were overlooked because Michael was just that damn good? And he said, you've got to think of it like this. He goes, McDonald's is my favorite restaurant, but the top sandwich on that menu is the Big Mac. But then you have chicken nuggets, you have the filet of fish, you have the crispy chicken, you have all these different things. Mm-hmm. Well, if Michael is the Big Mac comparatively, then Reggie might be the filet of fish and Hakeem might be the chicken nuggets. Hakeem, I think, doesn't get the type of recognition that I think he deserves because the Rockets won those 2 championships in between Michael retiring and coming back. But I think the real ones know. Clyde Drexler was good. He just wasn't Michael. And that's not a knock. I think in some respects, he gets the Isaiah Thomas, like current NBA player Isaiah Thomas, treatment in the fact like he was a top 3 shooting guard, but wasn't getting paid like one. Michael was. So I just think when you look at all these legends, you know, like even the center position, I think we were spoiled with the amount of centers, great centers we had.
Yep.
During that era in the 90s, you had David Robinson, you had Patrick Ewing, you had Hakeem Olajuwon. I mean, heck, even a guy that's a name that has a name that wasn't a star like him. I mean, you could go back and look at like guys like Kevin Duckworth. You could look at Robert Parrish, who won championships with the Celtics. Kareem was playing up until like what, in 89, 90. Like the 90s was filled with gluts of talent, and I think now people are starting to look at guys who were on their trading card collection like, wow, like I'm seeing them in action.
Yeah, hell, even 2 foreign guys like Rick Smits and Arvydas Sabonis, even though Sabonis came in later in his career. Luke Longley too.
Yeah. Luke Longley is an Australian legend to
Yeah.
this day.
Right.
Yep.
Definitely crazy. Scoop, man. So when I look at this whole thing, like the 10 parts, the one thing that I learned about his game was, as an assassin as he was, Jordan was a very unselfish guy too. Like he made that pass to Kerr, to Paxson, to other guys. Is there anything about the player that you didn't know going in that you now know now that you've seen it?
Maybe not the not knowing about the player. I think I was very MJ obsessed as a kid, but I do think that the dynamic of the transition from Collins to head coach Doug Collins. I'm always careful when I say Collins because sometimes I'll say Phil Collins and that's Phil in the air, not Doug Collins. So I'm like, wait, which Collins? Doug Collins. So Doug Collins, the transition from Doug Collins to Phil Jackson, like to me, some of that parallel reminds me of LeBron trying to get to the finals and having to get past the Chauncey Billups-led Pistons. The only difference is he didn't get that first ring in Cleveland. He got it in Miami. So imagine like Jordan not getting past the Pistons all those years and then say hypothetically he joined the Knicks or the Rockets and then he finally won one. That's the difference between that situation. And so when I look at that, it reminds me of a conversation I had with John Starks a couple years ago where he was like, he told me Michael will never be compared to LeBron because LeBron had to go to other teams to do it. Michael did it with one team. And that speaks volumes for somebody like Starks, who was a rival of Michael, for all those years. So I think that the Doug Collins, I said it right? Yeah, Doug Collins and Phil Jackson transition where Phil was like, like Doug Collins rejected the triangle offense and then, was not listening to Tex Winter. And then, that whole situation with Tex Winter, basically, taking that triangle offense and implementing it to Phil Jackson is what really made Michael a better player. Constant spacing, constant movement in the shape of a triangle. Like I talked to many players who have played in the triangle offense, and it's not an easy offense to kind of get acclimated to. But I think that change of power between Collins and Phil Jackson is something I really marvel at.
Brandon, you look at everything and you just mentioned it right now. One guy that's really getting a lot of clout through all this is Paul Pierce, after what he came out and said the other day about his top 5 and how he left LeBron off the top 5. And basically, he said what you said just now with how Starks went out there and said that, MJ went out and he did it all on his own. One team, he retired twice, but he did it all on his own. And the organizations that LeBron played with, much different, and having to switch it up. It's so true. And you're seeing that now. Now, with that said, more players, I feel as if they come out and say that, they get ridiculed for saying that, for leaving a guy like LeBron off their top 5 or whatever. But it's all opinionated. We all have to understand that. What's your take on Paul Pierce's thoughts on that?
I didn't hear what he said, but I'll be shameless admission. I don't really watch a ton of ESPN.
Okay.
So it's not personal. I just work a lot, but so I didn't see it, but I can only imagine what Pierce said because I know he and LeBron just well, more so Pierce now as a commentator,
Mhm.
just has, I personally feel, maybe some veiled competitive juices that want to allow LeBron to be great.
Right.
Potentially, I can see his point of view. You're a competitor. You're not going to give your competition the credit, and that's fine. We all do it in our own way. I'd say that to say, like, Pierce is also a byproduct of being drafted in 97, 98. And
Mhm.
so LeBron came around in 2003, and those guys were heated competitors for years. Um, he's a guy that's from Inglewood, California, so he grew up watching, the great Lakers and playing at the Great Western Forum. And so I'm sure that maybe there's a third eye or lens he has to speak how he feels. But um, younger people aren't going to say that.
Absolutely. And that's
So
what it comes down to.
yeah, so I think certain younger people younger than us, will say that that's a farce, because I think that um, it's funny just polling different players, like
Right.
past and present. To them, when Michael retired, Kobe was that Michael light. And I'm not comparing Michael to Kobe at all. But what I'm saying is, I didn't realize that until after Kobe passed away, and I really just sat back and observed. Like, you look at an NBA locker room. I remember in February, I was making trips back and forth to working Sixers games. I was working on a few feature stories and looking into Tobias Harris's locker, and just his whole foot locker, like below his where he sits, is nothing but Kobe sneakers. And it's funny because I know that Michael was so influential. Sometimes players would get fined for wearing his sneakers on the court during games, not by the NBA, Nike. Nike would fine players. They just changed the rule like this year. I found this out, where if you're a Nike guy and you were wearing Jordan sneakers, they fine you. They just took that. Yeah, that's crazy, right? Because Jordan is
Crazy.
Nike, right?
Yeah.
I found out that a few months ago. They just removed that fine.
Okay, that's interesting. I always, thought that, like, if you wear like a different competitor's shoe, yeah, you get fined for that. But wearing the same brand,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah. I just found it out a few months ago. And
Wow.
I was talking to a recently retired player who told me that if you're a Nike person and you wear Jordans, they fine you.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that. That's absolutely insane.
That is crazy. That's definitely crazy. Scoop. So for all these years, we've known that game as the flu game. Now we watch it and it's the pizza game. What was your take on them saying, nah, it wasn't the flu, it was he ordered pizza at like 10:30 and he had the chills and all of that stuff.
It
Like
did
when you
surprise
heard that, what was your take?
It did surprise me. I was hearing that in the '90s and 2000s that um, like if you notice, like, players would always get flu or get sick during the playoffs. And I remember my stepdad used to say, somebody's putting something in somebody's food. So when I heard that about Michael, it didn't really surprise me. That's why you send you should have went a little bit more low key. You should have sent one guy to the store to get it, and they bring it back. Not a whole rap entourage of people guarding his food, because that's not suspect. Ain't that many black people in Utah as it is.
Exactly.
So I say that to say, you sending a whole bunch of people to a hotel that it's obvious it's a chance that a Bulls player is staying at, and you bringing in pizza? Come on, B. We better than that. I think that it was suspect. I remember just seeing. I'm not surprised, but there's certain things that are just done for theatrics. Like for example, there are guys that have played for the Bulls for years, and I just was always fascinated with the dynamics of Dennis and Michael. Like how much did they talk or not? And like they didn't talk. That's what they were telling me. And then you see sequences where they kind of talk, um, and sometimes it was painted more for theatrics. I think there's certain things that are painted for theatrics for NBA purposes versus like that's how it is. So like when they said that the flu game was kind of altered with the Pizzagate, That didn't really surprise me either, just because I know how NBA stories can get altered, just like with Nick Anderson when I had him on the Scoopy Radio podcast, available on all streaming platforms, by the way. They talked about, like Nick talked about, how that 23 doesn't play like 45 kind of got misconstrued because it was a question, he answered it, and then he said it was ran with. And the funny thing is that nobody talks about is like, well, did you guys ever resolve it? And in talking to Nick Anderson, he said to me they did. They actually resolved it at Charles Oakley's house.
Wow.
Like, if I didn't like Michael, he says, think about this. The Jordan 10 sneakers was a sneaker that Jordan wore when he played baseball, and then he wore it in the double nickel game at Madison Square Garden when he came back and wore 45, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you look at the Jordan 10 sneakers, Jordan selected certain guys to wear his shoes even in retirement. And Nick Anderson was one of those guys. Kendall Gill, B.J. Armstrong, Harold Miner was wearing Jordan 10s as well. He goes, if I didn't like Michael, why the hell would I wear sneakers?
True.
This was pre-Jordan brand, like with Derek Jeter and some of those other guys were. They were hand-selected people that wore Air Jordan.
Right.
Nick Anderson was one of those guys. He's a legend playing at the University of Illinois and more. So, like, I say all that to say sometimes stories can kind of just take a life of their own, and you kind of gotta go back and do some research.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. Scoop, let me pause on the doc for a second here. Can you catch everybody up on what you've been doing? As we know, the Scooby radio is doing well, but I've been seeing you on Instagram live, talking to folks, chopping up with folks. Just catch everybody up on what you've been doing.
Well, basketball is definitely what I love, but there's more to me than just that. It's funny. Analyst Rashad Phillips calls me the male Oprah. He's like, because you interview people, your style is like, that's what he says. Like, he called me one day. He was like, yo, Oprah. So, like, sometimes in my tweets under the comments, he'll comment, like, he'll put Oprah in the comments. So, to answer your question directly, I have been doing some Instagram lives, and what I've been able to do is, reach out to people that I know. So, Instagram live, and since quarantine, I've had Pastor John Gray on, who is a mega pastor. He was actually my youth pastor when I was in high school, and there's over like maybe 1 million to 2 million followers on Instagram. But he's been in the game for a long time. I mean, he's been on the TV. He's appeared on the TV show Sister. He's been in the gospel group Kirk Franklin and the Family. So I had him on. We talked about God. We talked about just faith for over an hour. I've had WWE Hall of Famer Mark Henry on the Instagram Live.
Mm-hmm.
I've also had Tahiri Jose from Love and Hip Hop, as well as the National Basketball Wives Association President Mia White, who's married to Darrell Wright. And I also had a cooking session with Chef Lamar Moore, who won a competition recently.
I saw that one, yeah.
So, yeah, man, I just been diversifying and just, basketball is cool, but we ain't playing right now. But at the same time, I'm still able to go through my phone and reach out to who I need to reach out to, while also, extending to other avenues as well. So, it's pretty cool.
Brandon, outside of everything that you're doing right now, and I know you mentioned the fact that you're cooking, you're doing all these other interviews, everything like that, what's been your favorite thing that you've been doing during this whole quarantine process?
Sleeping.
I knew that was going to be your answer.
Aren't we all? That's funny. That's great.
Sleeping. I mean, I'll be honest with you, man. Like, the grind did not stop for me. As far as like,
right.
As far as like, just staying busy. But I think, in addition to before Corona hit, I'm doing all the things that I'm doing while also going out the door, catching the Amtrak to Philly to go work, catching up, going to JFK LaGuardia or Newark Airport to catch a flight to this place and that place. I'll just be transparent with you, Will. I know there was a point in the fall, like when I came to your studio and I told you I'm coming here, then I'm coming back home, I'm doing this. Like,
yes,
between July of last year to when stuff started, I had been in LA about 3 or 4 times, Flint, Michigan. I played a celebrity basketball game in Tallahassee, Florida. In January, I took a vacation to Mexico. That was the only vacation I took. Everything else was traveling for work, and I'm missing some other destinations and stops. But by the time Corona hit, I had just came back from Chicago during All-Star and was like in the bed for like a week, and then started really moving and grooving and making things happen again. The thing that I've enjoyed is really the not moving around part. I've literally just been like resting, but still getting work done. But I'll be honest with you, like the transition from being home to not was so I had written an article. I got a press release from a company that was doing something with Shaq, and it was about him and his mom. And I took the press release and kind of cut it down and took quotes from conversations I had with Shaq and his mom. I wrote the article and I texted to Shaq and I said, I wrote this. He's like, I appreciate you, homie. And I was like, yo, you free next week to come on the podcast? He was like, yeah, when you want to do it? That interview with Shaq kind of set the tone. And I just really, in my mind, just had a mindset like, I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to just be lazy and to not do anything and just to be ho-hum. And I really feel like this time is what you make of it. And it's creating a level playing field for a lot of creators, a lot of freelancers, and a lot of full-time people. I blur the line between all of that, but the only thing constant in life is change. And also, you're only as good as your last story. And so I've really used this time to really regroup and be productive.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting right there.
That's very, very true. Brandon, as you and everybody else does, we are waiting for the game to come back and for the season to finish out. We're hearing, is it going to be the Bahamas or Florida? Like they're trying to find a couple central places to play these games. From everything that you know or that you've heard, like are they leaning one way or another way? Are the players feeling this whole one spot, two spot thing?
I mean, I've spoken to coaches, I've spoken to players, I've spoken to people that work at the league office, and the thing that I say before I answer this question is, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm a journalist. I can tell you what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen.
Right.
That out the way. This is what I'll tell you. I have heard anything from they can resume the season at some point in the summer. They'll have a training camp for a month, and then a mini training camp for maybe 2 weeks to a month, and then they can start and resume some of the season. And maybe that season will be maybe 6 or 7 games, because you have teams like in between the 8th and the 9th spot where there's like a 3.5 to 3 game difference in the win percentage. So you look at like the Blazers and the Memphis Grizzlies as an example. Portland has dealt with injuries. They have Melo, they have Lillard and McCollum, and they were trying after the All-Star break. They were trying to make that push. So it could be a situation where that happens, and then where I've heard anything from Disney World. I had Keith Smith from Yahoo Sports on the Scoopy Radio podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he wrote a whole story in April about he worked at Disney for like 20 years, so he has a lot of resources within Disney and how they could accommodate them. You have a bunch of villas at Disney World in Orlando. You've heard Adam Silver discuss a college-like atmosphere. And so when you look at that situation in Disney, that makes sense. You have villas, and then you have the Disney's Wide World of Sports arena that they can play in. Perfect synergy for ESPN, who's owned by Disney, to make that happen.
That's right. And they have the rights for the NBA as well to telecast it.
Exactly. So now this is me speaking. If I was in that situation, I would start the playoffs as is with the seeding that it is. And you have the top 18. The Warriors and the Knicks, why would they want to come out to Orlando?
Right.
Exactly.
Not in a disrespectful way. It's just that's just what it is. You resume the season with the top 8 teams. They play. And again, this is me talking. Spencer Dinwiddie, proposed a situation similar to an NCAA bracket, where you have 64 teams. It's an elimination game. I think you get it done a lot faster. You recoup some of the money. And, hey, there might be a situation where a Memphis Grizzlies, hypothetically, who's young and has been resting, could really compete with a Lakers or Clippers team. You saw Memphis go toe-to-toe with the Lakers early in the wintertime, and it was an entertaining game. who's to say that can't be the case? But on the back end, I spoke to coach by phone a few days ago, and they said to me that if they do resume the season or whether they don't resume the season, the talk amongst executives and some players is that if they start the next season, it won't start until Christmas because the NBA doesn't want to compete with the NFL. But the other thing is, it kind of gives you a reprieve because I feel like this is a 2-year process where you're kind of playing catch up, if you will, and you're kind of resetting the mode. This is disrupted for 2 months. What now? So you end the season in the summertime. What happens? And then it makes me wonder. Like, okay, you canceled all the preseason draft stuff or pre-draft. Like the pre-draft stuff in Chicago that they do every year.
Right.
So when are you going to have the draft? Are you going to have the draft in June? You usually have it June 25th. Are you going to have it while the season is resuming? Like, there's a lot of stuff that needs to dissect. Then you look at the Nets, for example. Kyrie had surgery. I can tell you that Kyrie's been in Arizona training with a guy that trained Jason Kidd during his career. Robin is the guy's name. He's been out in Arizona working with him. So, does he come back? Then you look at KD. Does he come back? There's a lot of factors that go into that as well. You look at the Lakers. This was supposed to be their year. How does this rust affect their chemistry? How does this rust help or benefit the Clippers? The Clippers have been in a situation where they've kind of coasted and they've had the ability to kind of rest guys and do more. But as a cohesive unit, how much time have they had together to really be formidable and prepare for the playoffs? So, Giannis Antetokounmpo, another example. He hurt himself right before the halt of the season. And, you look at Ben Simmons, back injury. He's had time to rest. So there's a lot of things that benefit guys because they've just sat down and done nothing. And I think Disney would be a good fit just because it's so organized. I know Vegas has offered to rope off the strip in some areas for them, and then they can go to the they do the summer league in Vegas. So maybe there's a situation there. But to me, Disney just seems more organized.
That's very interesting. And, even hearing about, too, like the Christmas, starting their season at Christmas, the last time that happened was during the strike-shortened year in 2011 and 2012. So, hey, it can happen for sure. Obviously, this is much different than a lockout, due to a CBA. But we'll see what happens as time goes on. Brandon, one other thing that I got to ask you here is just to get back to the doc. With everything that happened, right? You keep on hearing about players. You keep on hearing about Michael being the best, right? And it opens up doors now for forgotten names to go out there and do it. You hear guys like John Stockton. He's obviously well noted. Another guy that really goes under the radar is Glenn Rice. Another guy that basically was a star in the 90s, being an all-star. What's your take on seeing these former guys talking like that?
I have a Glenn Rice story.
I love Glenn Rice, so go ahead. This is awesome.
So I talked about being in the Hornets locker room, and Glenn Rice and Anthony Mason were teammates. So at the time, I was trying to interview them before the game, and Anthony Mason was like, he's like, I can't do it now, but take my house number and call me later. So I call him, and when you call I told his son this story on the phone the other day. He was cracking up. When you call his house and he has a voicemail and it picks up, he goes, "Yo, you reached Mason. I can't come to the phone right now, but if you leave a message, I'll get back to you. Oh, and by the way, if you ain't down with Anthony Mason in the 9-8, I got 2 words for you. Fuck you," right? So, right, that was his voicemail. When I was in the lock, so then I called Anthony Mason back, and he answered the phone. I was like, "Hello? Yo, this is Brandon Robinson. Can I speak to Anthony Mason?" He's not here right now. It was Anthony Mason, right? so I said, you know what? I'm gonna stop calling Anthony Mason. So then Glenn Rice was like, they were on the road. They were on the road right at that point. So like, Glenn was like, "Yo, I'm staying at this hotel. Call a hotel desk, and tell them who you are." Like, I think he didn't have like a code name. Like a lot of guys, they'll have code names when they check into the hotel. So like Glenn. I missed Glenn, but I left a voicemail. My mom was like, hurry up, Brandon. She got me from school because I was supposed to do a phone interview with him. I missed it, but he left a voicemail. And when he left the voicemail, he's watching TV. And in the background, I'm hearing The Boy Meets World. I'm hearing, I'm like, yo, Glenn Rice watches Boy Meets World? Like, it was cool. But, you know, I should have known he was cool. We have the same birthday, May 28th, next week. And, you know, he's just a cool dude. Like, even though we didn't get a chance to sit and talk, you know, the fact that he made himself accessible to me was cool. But, you know, the Anthony Mason voicemail took the cake. But, you know, Glenn Rice to me was special. I just think that Glenn Rice just wasn't Michael. You know, great player at Michigan, solid shooter, did win a ring during his time with the Lakers with Kobe Bryant and Shaq early on under Phil Jackson. But, yeah, I like Glenn Rice. I was glad he got a ring. And I actually bumped into Glenn in Toronto during the All-Star weekend in 2016. And he had gained some weight, but at the same time, you could still recognize him in the face. And Glenn has been kind of making, you know, appearances and made himself more readily available. And man, I even remember his Miami Heat days, you know, and before the Charlotte Hornet days. And man, he was a problem. He was a problem for sure.
That's definitely true, Scoop, man. That's definitely true. Scoop, my final question for you is, as we know, everybody's been debating Jordan LeBron, Jordan LeBron, Jordan LeBron. I think after this doc, maybe the debate will kind of, I mean, it won't end, but maybe it'll calm down a little bit. I know you're not in his head, but what do you think LeBron James is maybe thinking to himself after he watches the doc and seeing how Jordan went about his ways? Like, do you think maybe he'll change how he'll talk to guys and treat guys? Because it seems like Jordan was able to get the most out of everybody, and it seems like LeBron has to carry everybody. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, I'm going to tell you a secret. It was never a debate of who was better, Michael or LeBron. Michael was in his own lane, and that's not to take anything away from LeBron. But I sometimes think that in media culture and fan culture, it's almost like they wake up in the morning. It's like, how can I be better than Michael? What's it? I don't think it's that deep. I think that LeBron was already doing some of the things that you mentioned. When I look at LeBron James, I think he's a taller Jason Kidd. He's always been a pass first point guard. You saw it in high school. You know, I remember reading about LeBron James in Slam magazine. LeBron and I are the same age. I remember reading about LeBron in high school, knowing that this guy from Akron, they were saying this guy from Akron was going to be special.
Right.
I think the problem with this whole Michael and LeBron debate is this: how could you compare a well done steak to a steak that you just put in the oven or that's halfway being cooked? You can't compare careers until they're over.
Right.
But here's the thing. LeBron is more Magic and Scottie Pippen and Oscar Robertson than he is Michael Jordan. Kobe Bryant is the closest thing to Michael Jordan.
That's right.
I agree.
I know I was reading this before you. I didn't see the whole interview that Horace Grant did on ESPN 1000 out in Chicago, but I know that I read, you know, like an infographic, and they were asking Horace Grant, who played with Michael and had played with Penny, Michael, and Kobe Bryant, won championships with Michael and Kobe, and they asked him the difference, and it's he said comparing 1 and 1A, and even so, like I know Kendall Gill has said to me, the only advantage that Kobe Bryant had over Michael is he was a better three-point shooter. That's it. Mm-hmm. And I think if Kobe had won those two championships that he lost, he'd have 7 rings. And you know, I think that the championship thing, if you're comparing that, okay, he'd have more, but he doesn't. I think LeBron James is the Michael Jordan of his era, but he's not Michael Jordan. I just think that he's an improved Magic Johnson with a better jumper. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, but at the same time, when you start talking about Michael, Kareem has 6 championships too. And to be honest with you, Kareem has 2 championships with 2 different names. Assalamu alaikum. Lou Alcindor and Hakeem and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won championships. Milwaukee Bucks and then Los Angeles Lakers.
Right.
But when you look at Kareem at Powell Memorial in New York City, he was winning there. He won under, at UCLA under John Wooden. Like, he's won at every level. To be honest with you, Kareem is more Tom Brady-like than he is Michael Jordan-like anyway. So, if you want to have the conversation about Michael and LeBron, you need to have it about Kareem too. You have to have it about Bill Russell. But what happens is the two guard and the small forward is like the wide receiver in the NFL. Centers don't sell shoes, with the exception of Shaq. So when you look at the flashy point guard or the two guard or the small forward, those are considered the alpha males. And so that's why the whole Kobe, LeBron, Michael thing is sexy to everybody. And I didn't grow up watching Kareem. I can only talk about Kareem from watching classic sports. Just like somebody 19 or 20 can't tell me about Michael because I grew up watching Michael. I think the problem is you can't compare eras. When you start comparing eras, you kind of bastardize the game.
Yeah, and you get lost in it, and it's not good. And you lose feel of reality as a whole right now at this moment. It's so true, Brandon. Talking about just comparing eras, different rules, different types of players, everything like that. And just to get back to your point of what you said with regards to the shooting guard, the small forward, and the point guard, there are many people out there that can relate to heights. I'm 6 foot. I'm 6'1", 6'2". We could all relate to those types of players. We can't relate to the big man because there's only one in however many of them there are in the world. So that's
exception to the rule.
Right.
Because Shaq is relatable because he's silly and because he's likable.
Right.
But he's big as hell.
Right.
Steph Curry is relatable to families, white men, and people 6 feet and below. Not a knock. That's just what he's relatable to. And because he can shoot. Most guys can't dunk. So the fact that he's a proficient shooter, he's relatable.
Right. Absolutely, 100%. Brandon, you're a busy guy. Thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate your time. And how do the people follow you on social media? We follow you, but for the people out there that are listening to the show for the first time, how do the people follow you on social media platforms?
First and foremost, subscribe to the Scoop B Radio podcast, which is available on our streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, TuneIn app, Stitcher app, iHeartRadio, or simply visiting scoopbradio.com. 2.1 million streams last year. But in addition to that,
amazing,
Twitter at Scoop B, Instagram and Snapchat at Scoop_B, and Facebook, Facebook.com/Scoop B.
2.1 million. Scoop, that's awesome.
That's a lot.
That's awesome.
Thank you, man. Thank you. A lot of hard work and a lot of sleepless nights. This is why I'm thankful for this reprieve right now.
Absolutely. You said it earlier, man. Brandon, go catch up on some rest. You're a hardworking guy, and thank you. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. Y'all get some rest too.
Absolutely.
We're definitely trying to, man.
We're trying to.
Hey.
All right, Brandon. Peace out, baby.
My man. I'll talk to y'all soon.
All right, Brandon. Cool. That was the one and only Brandon Robinson, a.k.a. Scoop B. Will, Scoop is a great guy. We love him to death. Always a great time, man.
Absolutely. Very well-known, knowledgeable, knows his basketball. And not only that, listen, what more can you say? One of the more hardest working guys out there in media right now. So can't knock him.
Definitely. Well, any final thoughts on this show, pal?
Not really. Just, one day at a time. And, what more can you say at this point, man? Episode 201 is in the books. We got to do an episode, just me and you, one day where we're just going to talk about the highs, the lows, everything like that going on. So that's my final thought.
Yeah. For everyone out there, the John Forsland episode is up on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify. And that was episode 200. And I put up a emotional post because
I didn't see it yet. I've been editing videos, so believe me, I saw it coming out. I was editing video too, so once I see it, believe me, you'll know about it. But I'm sorry to cut you off, Sean.
All good, man. All good, man. And well, and part of what I said was, if you would have told me after the first show that we did that we would be able to do 199 more, I wouldn't have said no, but I would have said I don't know, because we don't know how these things go. Like, you start off good and then you get cold, or you start off cold and you get hot. And well, the one thing I could say me and you have honestly been, especially you, has been consistent. The wavelength hasn't gone too low, it hasn't gone too high. The wavelength has stayed the same. So, well, I love you, pal. Congratulations on 200 shows. Hopefully, we have another 200 more, then 200 more, then 200 more. Continue the great work, and shout out to everybody that tunes into the show, downloads the show, and of course, shout out to the great guests like Scoop B and Combo and Mike Dunn and Ed Easton and Steve Weish and me and well favorite Brendan Burke and everybody that has come on the show. We appreciate you all, man.
Absolutely. Just countless names that we've had on over the course of 2 years. And, it's going to be 2 years at what, the end of the month. It's just absolutely
Around
crazy.
June, yeah.
So it's just absolutely nuts what's going on. But, we thank the fans. We thank everybody out there that has followed us. Yeah, we may have a small following, but on Instagram and on Twitter, but that stuff doesn't matter to us. We're going to keep on putting out the content, and day by day, brick by brick, we're going to build this thing. And that's the main thing that we could always say over here, is that we try here at On the Board Sports. And, many people say, oh, well, you didn't try hard enough in sports. And, well, you got to understand, you can knock somebody for that, but you can never question a man's character or, determination or grit. So with that said, Sean, I just want to say thank you for being who you are, and just thank you for being, like I said before, and this is going to be recorded. I'll say it once, I say it again. If it wasn't for you back in 2018, there would be no show. There would be no On the Board Sports. There would be no Talking to Sports Host. We would probably be guessing what we'd be doing right now at that point in time in 2018. So, you can thank me all you want. I'll always thank you for just posting that and just, making that happen, man. So thank you.
Appreciate you, pal. Appreciate you, man. So, and well said, well said. So, for my partner, William Chirucci, a.k.a. Will C, and shout out to our guest again, the wonderful Brendan Robinson, a.k.a. Scoop B. I'm your host, Sean Thomas, a.k.a. Shawnee on the mic. Once again, 200 episodes in. Thank you to everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Peace out and stay safe.